Okay, so now you've got all your blocks made, and so you need to go and measure them all and see what your measurement is. They're going to be 12 inches finished when they're sewn into the quilt, but it should measure 12 and a half inches unfinished. That's going to allow for your 1/4 inch seam allowance on all sides. But like I said before, it may be, it pieced a little bit different, or you're just consistently sew them at a different size. So you may be 12 and a quarter, 12 and 3/8, 12 and an eighth. Just measure all your blocks and see what size it is and square them all up to where they're the same size. Just watch all your points here on the outside. You should have a 1/4 inch on those. Okay, your blocks are all squared up. You're going to cut your sashing. If your blocks are squared up to 12 and a half, cut your sashing at 12 and a half. But say you were the 12 and a quarter or the 12 and an eighth person, then that's going to be the size you're going to cut your strips. If most of them are 12 and a half and you just have a little bit that's off, just, that little 1/8 of an inch, mark it with a pin. Just stick a straight pin in there so that when you're sewing your blocks together and you're setting the sashing in, then you'll know to make an adjustment for that. That's not going to be a full seam. You're going to have to slide that over a little bit to help fudge that amount in. So just keeping that in mind when you're cutting all your sashing, cut it to what the size is that your block is at the unfinished size. Remember, when you're sewing in a piece that is larger and you need to ease in the extra fabric, put the larger piece on the bottom so that your feed dogs will help you in easing in that fullness. You can use more pins, but the feed dog will ease in the extra fullness that you have. Okay, first thing, set your blocks up. If you don't have a design wall, if you can hang them up vertically, it's easier to see what you're looking at than having it laying on the floor or the bed. Get a flannel back tablecloth if you don't have a design wall. What I've done is I've got foam core and I just covered it with batting, and I attached it to like a piece of wood so that it is stiff and firm. But this is portable. I can move it around. It's not attached to the wall. You can just take a flannel backed tablecloth and hang that up on the wall and use that. Your blocks will stick to the flannel. So just lay them out. You know that when you lay them out, if you made the 4 log cabins, they're going to be going in the corners. So set them how you like them, either the way that they're set here now, or you can turn it and set them all like that to where you've got the light side coming on the inside. So set all your blocks up and then look at them. We did a sampler quilt. Now when you're doing a quilt that's all the same blocks, you're just going to lay it out. But when you have a sampler quilt and your blocks are different, you need to look at the overall picture of it to see the color, the placement, and everything. So set your blocks up and then look at them to see what changes you might need to do to it. Look at your colors. Does something jump out at you to where you want to maybe play it down a little bit? So just kind of lay them out in a couple of different ways. A lot of times I'll set it up and I walk away from it, and I'll come back later and I look at it again, say, oh, no, I need to move that. What I did on this, because I've got several that have some blue in it, so I kind of just focused my blue right here on those. This one here is a darker block, so it kind of stood out. But I've got 2 here that are like stars, so I went ahead and put them in the center and just rearranged everything to where it all looked pleasing to me. Do the same with your blocks. What looks pleasing to you? You do not have to follow the exact layout that was in your illustration for the class. But just lay those out. Now we're going to talk about some different sashing options. You could sew them all together without any sashing, but that's going to have your blocks run right up into the other, and they're not going to stand out at all. Whenever you're doing other blocks, and say maybe you've got 2 different blocks, they'll sometimes create an alternate block where patterns meet up, and so you may not want sashing in that. This one, I think you're going to want sashing in it. The sashing that's up there, I cut it at 2.5 inches wide. For your sashing, you don't want to go any larger than 1/3 the size of the block. Our blocks are going to finish at 12 inches. So 1/3 of that would be 4 inches. That would be a pretty wide sashing, but you wouldn't want to go any larger than that. So the size I cut this sashing at was at 2.5. So when it's sewn in, it's going to be a 2-inch sashing. And that's the size I decided to go with. When you cut your sashing, and if you're going to do a plain sashing, you're going to cut 8 strips that are going to be 2.5 by 12.5, and you're going to sew them to the right side of these 2 blocks, and then sew that block onto that. So that's how you would set that up. Then you're also going to have 3, that'll be 1, 2, 3 strips that are going to be 2.5 by 40.5. And that's where these would go. When you sew those on, you would have this, all your rows pieced together here. You would put your sashing on all of those, and then you would sew a strip to the bottom here, and you'd sew a strip to the bottom of that one, and a strip to the bottom of that one. Now when you sew those 3 together, you need to take a ruler and mark down at the bottom of your strip here where this, just line up a ruler and just put a little tick mark down here where the strips are going on your sashing straight down, because you want to attach that sashing and match it up to that at those set points. So when you set those up there, you want them to go match, and you'll do that on every row when you attach the rows. That way your sashing will appear to be going straight. If you don't do that, you may have it once here and then this one might be over here. When you come put this one on, it might be over here maybe 1/4 of an inch or something that it's off, and it's going to have your blocks going like zigzag kind of running down through there. Then after you sew on all the rows here on the center, you need to come and do on the outside. And then you're going to cut 2 strips that are 2.5 by 54.5, and that's going to be on the outside. And the way I figure out the size to cut those strips at, this is supposed to, like I said, you always work in finished sizes. So each one is 12 inches. So that's 12 times 1, 2, 3, 4. That's 48. And then you've got 2 inches sewn in here, 2 there, 2 there. And so that's 48, 49, 50, 52, 54. So that would have all of that. 2 strips at 2.5 by 44.5. And that's going to go on the top and the bottom. But you have to sew the sides on first. So that it saves fabric a little bit. And usually when I attach my sashing and my borders, I attach it on the sides first and then the top and the bottom, because I'm going to need less of a length on the sides then. So that again was 8 2.5 by 12.5 strips for your sashing, 3 2.5 by 40.5 strips, 2 2.5 by 44.5, and 2 2.5 by 54.5. And the yardage that you would need is going to be 1 5/8 of yards of your fabric that you're using for your sashing. On the sashing strips, if you're going to do plain sashing, you want to cut your long strips first. So you're going to cut that 54.5 inch one first, and then cut your 44.5 and then your 40.5, and then what's left is where the 12.5 is going to come from. Now if you want to go and do cornerstones or posts, that's another word for it. Let me put these up. You're going to cut 2.5-inch squares for each one of those that you need. I'm not going to do the whole quilt here. So now I've done cornerstones and I've put those. So this is what that would look like if you go and do the cornerstones. Now you would also want to come and put them out here on the sides, at the end of each sashing strip, at the top, up in the corner. So I counted up, if you do the post on there and you're doing the sashing on the outside, you're going to have 20 cornerstones. They're cut at 2.5 inches. Whatever you cut the strips for your sashing, that's going to be the same size you're going to cut your post and your cornerstones. You're going to need 31 of the 2.5 by 12.5 strips because you're placing them here and there. So when you go to sew this together, you'll sew your row. This becomes a whole nother row. You're going to sew your sashing strip, a cornerstone, a sashing strip, a cornerstone. You're going to sew that as one row. So you're going to have several rows then you attach that row to that one. You're going to match up the corners of the block, your sashing, where those seams intersect. That's going to be the points you're going to be matching up. You're also going to have some sashing on the outside and a cornerstone up in the corners, on the outside corners. So that's how you would go and do that. I'll try to go type in all these cut sizes and everything into the description on the box on the YouTube thing. So just read the see more and go through and you can get that. But I figured out if you're going to go with cornerstones, you're going to need 1 5/8 yards of the background. It's the same amount, it's just cut different. So another setting that you could do is called Friendship Star. You're going to cut the 2.5-inch squares, and it's a fold and sew technique. So you're going to have a square here, and you're going to mark your diagonal line, and that's going to be your stitch line. And just match it up on your sashing, and then you're going to fold that back. So you'll be cutting off the back side here. You'll be cutting that off, leave your seam allowance, and then press that back. So that's like a folded corner. So you would put this on your sashing strips and it's going to make a little star. So you can kind of see what that looks like. I've got another quilt here that I've done that on. It's another sampler quilt. And I put the cornerstones and put the little friendship stars on it. And you can see up in the corner, when you go to do this, you're going to be doing another row. So you're going to have sashing here, another row of sashing because you putting these star points in that sashing. So there's a half square triangle that I put there, a square, plain square there, but this is on the regular sashing. So I've got my sashing strip there. That's just a plain one to help fill out that area on the, but see how I've got the star points opposite? But that way you've got that on there on your star points. So you can see how that works out, and you're going to have like a double sashing row running on the outside. But that's what, if you were to do friendship stars on it, that's what it's going to look like. Let's see, with that, you were going to need 45 strips here in order to do that, because that was counting in all the extra to run around on the background. So you would need 1 1/4 yard of background. I did not figure out what you would need on the stars because I figured you just use your scraps, or you could just choose one other thing to do that. So I'm going to take all of this down, and I've got another option that's a little bit different. It's using 9 patches. Okay, and here's the friendship star. And like I said, you do a half a fold over corner on the star points. So you take a square and you're going to stitch it diagonally and then fold it back. And you're going to trim off the part that's underneath there. And that's how you would make those. So I worked this up and sewed it like we were sewing 9 patches. I cut my strips. It's going to finish at 3 inches, so I cut each strip at 1.5 inches. This is going to be the main sashing, and it's going to be 3 inches finished. Right now it's going to measure 3.5. So I've got this cut at 12.5 inches. So I'm just going to place a few of these in so you can kind of see what it's going to look like if you were to do something like this. Okay, so you've got your sashing, and it's basically you just strip it like you're making a 9 patch, but I cut them at 12.5 inches in order to fit here on my blocks. And then you're also going to make some little 9 patches so that they will fit in here. So you can see that's what it looks like if you go and you put a 9 patch in it. So the strips here had light, dark, light, but the 9 patch has dark, light, dark. So it's got the dark in the corners so that it would stand out. So that's one thing that you could do on that. And you would also want to run the 9 patches out here, or else just longer strips of this, whichever way you wanted to go, so that it would finish it on the sides. And then if you want to put another border on the outside. But that's how I would do that sashing there. I would probably go ahead and run it exactly the same here on the outside. Okay, here's the 9 patch up close. Like I said, I don't have everything spaced out for the larger sashing on here, but you can see how that would fit in on that for the look that you would get on your quilt. But here's another one that I found, and I think that's what I'm going to do with mine. I'm going to go ahead, because I've not done this before on a quilt, but I thought, I really like it for the look. It's from an older quilt. That's where I saw it, and so I drew it up. But this, instead of doing a 9 patch, it's a little pieced block. So this one, it makes like a little a donut or something like that. And I've stripped this like for the 9 patches here, not light. It's got the 2 darks on the ends. And then this section here, it's cut 3.5 inches, and it's a 1.5 inch strip. So you would need 2 of those for each one. And on that, it's the same thing. I would carry it onto the outside, and I probably would not put a border on the final outside of that. But those are some options for you to think about on doing your settings. But you can see how that looks on that. And it's just pieced with a log on the top and that 9 patch segment in the bottom there.